Sure. Okay, so we're going to talk about whether or not PR threatens the integrity of the press. I want to say that it does. In order to make sense of that, you have to understand the way in which the press now works, or, if I'd put it more accurately, doesn't work effectively. We have become, as an industry, as a profession, highly vulnerable to being manipulated by outsiders. And this is a relatively new thing. What's happened, as I describe in the book, is that ownership of the media has changed. We used to belong to patriarchal proprietors like Lord Beaverbrook or Hearst in the United States, who used and abused media outlets as the vehicles for propaganda. Now, in the last 3 or 4 decades, that's slowly shifted. The ownership has moved over to corporations. Their interest, understandably, is not so much propaganda as profit. And in order to pursue that, they've done various things which have had an almighty impact on the way we work and which has made us vulnerable to being manipulated by outsiders. So crucially, they've cut costs by cutting our editorial staffing levels. They've increased our output, lots of extra supplements in newspapers, 24-hour broadcasting in radio and telly. And we did a huge piece of number crunching for the book, which said that on average, which revealed that on average, Fleet Street journalists now fill 3 times as much space as they used to 20 years ago. And if you turn that round, what you see is that we have only a third of the time to work on our stories. On average, this is, okay? Now, if you take away time from reporters, you take away our most important working asset. So on the whole, we're no longer out there doing the things that reporters are supposed to do. We're not out there making contacts and finding stories. We're not even checking facts. We've become, by and large, passive processors of material that other people provide for us. And the key other people who are doing that are the PR industry. And just to explain to you one other thing that the number crunching research for this book established was that by sampling thousands of news stories in the quality press, the best newspapers in this country, we looked at all those stories where there was a central statement of fact. And we said, insofar as there is such a statement, is there evidence that that statement is being thoroughly checked? Well, the answer should be that's the case in 100% of the stories. What we actually found was that it now goes on in only 12%. So if we're sitting there passively processing material and not checking it, we're very, very vulnerable to other people taking advantage. Okay, now that's where the PR industry comes in. Because while we've been losing our staff, of course, the PR industry has been getting bigger and bigger. And there was an invisible moment at some point in the last decade where the number of PR people in the country actually overtook the number of journalists. Somebody's phone. My God. Okay, so are we all right with the phone? Good. So what you need to understand here is that the way in which PR operates on the media, you can see it as falling under 2 headings. PR people always deny this, but it is the case that from time to time, PR people feed us falsehood. PR people, if stuck in a corner, I've been doing this job 31 years, and I have had the experience of PR people lying to me. Now that goes on, although PR people like to deny it. So, for example, in the book, I looked in great detail at the way in which the Observer newspaper was manipulated in the build-up to the invasion of Iraq, partly by the Central Intelligence Agency in the States, working away on one particular very good reporter, and partly by Downing Street, working away on the then political editor. And there are examples in there of sheer brazen falsehood coming out of the Downing Street PR machine. There's an Observer story which says, next week, the Institute for Strategic Studies will publish a report all about Saddam Hussein's links to terrorist groups. There's the story with the summary provided by the Downing Street PR machine. Well, then I check, read this report that was published a few days after that newspaper report in the Observer. The report says nothing of the kind. Downing Street misled the Observer. It's falsehood. There's a wonderful occasion in there where Downing Street say, oh yeah, you want to look at this report that's been published this morning by the IAEA, that's the International Atomic Energy Authority. It's all about new activity on Saddam's nuclear sites. So I thought I must find this report and check whether what Downing Street told the Observer was true. And I checked, and I couldn't find the report. The report didn't even exist. It wasn't that they'd misrepresented its contents, they'd invented it. So part of the problem with PR exploiting our vulnerability is that it makes them very, very easy. It makes it very easy for them to lie to us. But much more important than that is that in the normal, everyday business of PR activity, it's about telling the truth, but telling the truth in a way that serves the commercial or political interests of the organizations who are hiring that PR. If it wasn't serving those interests, those PR people wouldn't be doing their job.
So, it's a bit close to your microphone, please.
I'm too close.
No, can you be closer? Sorry.
Can you hear me all right?
It's up the top.
Actually, is it? No, maybe it's working. Okay, so if you just put yourselves, for example, in the position, imagine you are the head of the press office for the Metropolitan Police. And let's say you come in the morning, and there on the log are 2 stories, both of them true. And one of them says, a Metropolitan Police commander last night was so drunk that he had to be sent home from work and he's been suspended from duty. And another story on the log says, a police constable this morning will be given an award for bravery because he saved a baby from a burning building. Now, ask yourself, which story will you feed to the reporters? Both of these are true. You will select the story that serves the interests of your organisation. I spend a lot of time with press officers. It's like, so, for example, I was talking to one who runs the press office for a major government department, and he was saying that they have it as a routine that anybody from middle management up must file with them a report of anything that happens that could conceivably attract the attention of the press. And the press office then write what they call forecasts, which is to say they anticipate the newspapers asking, and they produce the quote which they'll give. And the key point that the press officer was making was, we never get asked about most of this stuff. He had an example of, I can't get into too much detail, but 2 quite senior people who were married to each other in the government department, and the man, who was married to the woman also in the same department, had ended up chasing around the house with an axe, right? And he'd been arrested for this. So that gets reported. What are we going to say when the press get in touch? The press don't get in touch, because they're deciding what stories we cover. We're sitting there waiting to be told, okay? So that's the key thing that's going on, the selection of truth, the selection of angles. That's what happens routinely, the way that PR undermines the way that reporters should be working because we're so vulnerable. And you have to understand that some of this is quite subtle. It isn't just about press releases and press conferences, which certainly serve that function of making these selections for us. But the PR industry has become more and more subtle as it's gone along. So, for example, they construct pseudo-events, things that happen in order to be reported. And if you just, for example, look at the Olympic torch, why are they running halfway across the world with a flame? It's not because that's the only way to get the flame to the Olympic Games. That is a pseudo-event constructed to attract media attention. And if you look at the people who are attacking the torch on behalf of the anti-Chinese protesters, they also are doing that only because the media are there. The entire thing is artifice. Both sides of what's going on the streets of London at the weekend in Paris is artifice constructed to be reported. There's masses of that, pseudo-events. There are pseudo-groups who exist only because PR companies have constructed them. Do you know in America there are so many phony grassroots groups? They have rather a wizard name for them. They call them AstroTurf because they're not real grassroots groups. So a splendid example of an AstroTurf group is the Iraqi National Congress, the organization of Iraqi exiles, which was so important in the build-up to the invasion of Iraq. That organization was an AstroTurf group created by a very, very clever PR man called John Rendon, who works in the States for the Rendon Group. He had a contract from the State Department to massage global public opinion about Saddam Hussein's regime. He says, we need a story, so we set up this group. So we hire these people. Ahmed Chalabi, you'll be head of this group. I'll write you some speeches. We'll hold a conference. It'll be in London. We'll invite the hacks. It's artifice. It's all being created. The pseudo-events, the pseudo-groups. There are pseudo-illnesses being created by PR companies working for pharmaceutical groups. There's a thing called social anxiety disorder, which I talk about in the book. That's better known as shyness, but that was converted by clever PR people into a specific illness in order to promote a drug that had been developed by a pharmaceutical company. I've only got 1 more minute. Okay. There's pseudo-evidence as well. The great thing, the best reactions I've had from people reading this book are readers who come back and say, I can now decode newspapers. So one thing to look out for is, particularly on a Monday, pseudo-surveys, which are just designed in order to get the name of some commercial interest into the newspaper. There was one particular Monday where I looked and I found 9 different pseudo-surveys in The Guardian and 9 separate different ones in The Sun. It's so easy to manipulate us. And at the end of all this, what you have is a media that, because partly of its own vulnerability, is failing to do what it should be doing, to select the stories and the angles and the sources and the quotes and the pictures which serve the interests of our readers. Instead, we are being subverted so easily by a clever and much expanded industry which serves the commercial and political interests of the people who pay it. I urge you to vote for the resolution. Thank you.
Brilliant, John. Thank you.